All right. In this discussion, I want to spend my focus on the endocrine system, at least the general physiologic aspects of this system. I made a video about a week or so ago about this, and I'm not really satisfied with it, so I'm going to redo it. But you know, again, when it comes to understanding the endocrine system, there are two major components when it comes to understanding the endocrine system. One, obviously, is the glands and the hormones, which traditionally are taught, in heavy amounts. And then the other part is how the hormones work. Okay, what the hormones exactly do to stimulate responses at the cells that they affect. And I think that's a part that's often maybe neglected a little too much. So that's why I want to kind of make a video just talking about some basic cell biology, and just some basic physiologic concepts about how the endocrine system works, to sound overly redundant. So, again, this is, personally, this has always been my favorite organ system. I've always found it fascinating that such tiny amounts of small molecules can create such profound effects on the human body. I mean, for example, a surge of adrenaline throughout your bloodstream can give a person enough strength to lift an automobile off of somebody, in the midst of a car accident. And then, or your sex hormones can, make you develop your secondary sex characteristics, or create the cells, the gametes for reproductive purposes, or hormones such as growth hormone can stimulate a person to be, upwards of 8 feet tall, or vice versa. Not enough of this hormone could force a person to be only, 4.5 feet tall. So it's kind of amazing, how these, it's just amazing the effects that these hormones can elicit on the human body. So, like I said, this is a topic I personally enjoy discussing. So, on that note, let's get rolling. So, the endocrine system, that has a few different components that require, obviously, to be covered. And in this particular video, like I said, I want to give an overview of the basic, just an overview of how the system works. Then I want to spend the bulk of it talking about just some basic properties of hormones and how they work. Okay. And then in other videos, and the next one following this is going to be about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and then, all the other endocrine glands. And then we'll talk a little bit about stress and adaptation. And, right now, I don't have ambitions to make videos on specific endocrine disorders. I will probably hit on some as I go, but later on, I will probably, make some more endocrine disorder videos later on. But, there are some, definitely some basic applications into pathophysiology that we can just throw right into our discussions. So, but like I said, this video in particular is going to be just a general overview and just a general focus on hormones and how they work. All right. And then in videos following will be these other topics that are bullet pointed here. Okay. Now, the endocrine system, in a nutshell, is relatively simple to understand. The endocrine system, essentially is comprised of glands and hormones. Okay, so we're talking glands and hormones. Okay, so basically this is a system that's designed for communication purposes. All right, the endocrine system is a communicating system, and that the other communicating system of the body is the nervous system. Okay, and both of these are important for their own specific types of communication purposes. The nervous system, let's do a little compare and contrast in terms of the communication, and how they work. Okay, the nervous system, is very precise, whereas the endocrine system is very broad. Okay, thought that looked funny. So essentially with the nervous system, you guys all understand your basic neurophysiology by now. If we want a nerve the nerves that innervate the tissues are highly specific. So if we need to get a specific message out to a tissue, these nerves will generate action potentials down their axons. Neurotransmitters will be squirted out, and then on this specific site, where this, where the synaptic connection is made, you will see an action taking place. Okay, like for example, if you want to make a skeletal muscle contract, okay, you only need to depolarize. You only need to stimulate one small part of a skeletal muscle. You remember, if you have because remember, skeletal muscle cells are long. But if we innervate one little part of a skeletal muscle, and then we excite this little part, remember, the whole muscle cell will, that action potential will propagate along the muscle, and then contraction will occur. Okay, so the nerve, and there are some cases where, I mean, not some, but I mean pretty much all cases, except for an extremely extreme situation, extremely extreme, in very extreme, survival or stress type situations. Okay, we don't want all of our muscles contracting at the same time. Okay, so our nerves can just stimulate a few muscle fibers within the skeletal muscle, and then they'll twitch, and then we'll have a contraction, and with only a quarter to half of our force, the muscle can potentially generate. Okay, and the reason why that we don't want all of our muscle fibers contracting in one shot, because we'll basically rip our tendons right out of our bones, because our muscles are far more capable of generating more force than what we use on a regular basis. Whereas with the endocrine system, the endocrine system is a lot more broad, meaning, the endocrine system is, as we mentioned previously, glands and hormones. Okay, the endocrine system, what it does, these glands, they squirt out their hormones into the interstitial fluids, the tissue fluids of the body, when they are stimulated. Okay, in normal situations, a gland has to be stimulated, and in most cases, it's by usually some kind of, some kind of a nervous system communication. All right, and then these hormones diffuse through our tissue fluids into the bloodstream. Okay, and then these hormones, travel in the bloodstream, and then they will diffuse out of the bloodstream into another tissue space somewhere else in the body, and then they will interact with whatever their targets are, with whatever their target cells are. All right. And this is variable depending on the hormone, the class of hormone, the chemical makeup of the hormone, and so on. But let's stick with the muscle example. All right, if we want to stimulate muscle to grow, okay, a nerve, nerves are only designed to chemically stimulate muscles to contract. All right, but there are certain hormones, we can, and like I said before, these nerves are only only stimulating one little part of the nerve. That's not enough to activate something, items like growth mechanisms in a cell. That only activates the contractile mechanisms of the cell. All right, but what these hormones can do, depending on the class and type of hormone, are these hormones can diffuse through the bloodstream into the muscle tissues and interact with all of the muscle fibers. Okay, all of the muscle cells, and then once they get in, then they can stimulate all of the muscle cells to undergo, protein synthesis, crank out more contractile proteins, and become larger. Okay, that's a much more broad effect. All right. Plus the same hormones, that may stimulate the muscle cells to grow may have effects on other tissues as well. All right. The hormone I'm thinking about here is testosterone. All right, or growth hormone. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, so the hormone system is very broad. It's it's a very broad type communicating system, but it's important because or think about something like your metabolism. Remember our metabolism is just the sum of all of our chemical reactions in our body. Okay. We don't have nerves going out and innervating every single cell of the human body. So if we need to dramatically increase or decrease our metabolism, the nervous system alone is not capable of performing this feat. But the nervous system can work together with the endocrine system to accomplish this. Like, let's say, for example, you eat a meal and you need to burn more calories, so you need to increase your thyroid hormone levels. Okay, so as a result, you can squirt out thyroid hormone, which increases your basal metabolic rate, and there are more cells that are targeted to this hormone than others, or by this hormone than others, but you get the picture. Okay, we can squirt out all these little chemical messages that can potentially bang into cells, lots of cells, versus these nerves that are limited to their axonal projections. All right. So both of these are important for their own specific types of communication. So basically the nervous system is very good for rapid communication, whereas the endocrine system, the responses you see are typically a little more slow. Okay, or a little more slow. Now, also the recovery from these, in terms of speed, that's where these differ as well, because the nervous system is also a lot more quick to recover from some form of communication, whereas hormones are typically slower to elicit their effects, and they're typically slower to come down from the effects as well. Okay, so the endocrine system, because these hormones have to interact with the cells differently than neurotransmitters do, because we have to clear these hormones out. Okay, there's a lot more that goes into using the endocrine system or just not a lot more, just different. Okay, so both of these are the communicating systems of the body, but the endocrine system, communicates differently, but with the help of the nervous system. That's why some people out there call this the neuroendocrine system, because the two need each other. Now, it's something to also bear in mind is that hormones are not supposed to release or secrete, glands are not supposed to secrete their hormones unless stimulated. Okay, if glands are randomly squirting out hormones when they're not supposed to, then you're going to see some problems or pathologies. And that's that's how you can tell some people have certain forms of cancers that originate from glands, or tumors that are developing in glands. Okay, because there are tumors that originate in glandular tissues, adenomas, that because you have to remember, cancers and tumors started out as regular tissues, but they're abnormal versions of these tissues. So that may mean that the regulatory switches that normally keep glands shut off in certain situations have now been overridden by the defective cells, and you can see certain effects. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So the endocrine system is relatively simple. Like I said, the endocrine system releases its, when stimulated, secretes its hormones into the interstitial fluid, the tissue fluids. Those hormones diffuse into the blood. They travel a nice long distance to wherever they need to go, and then they stimulate their target tissues. All right. So just keep that that general concept in mind. Now, and then in understanding these kind of the very basic step-by-step functions that we just talked about here. Now we have to kind of separate into what are the various classes of hormones, how are hormones circulated through the blood, and how do these different classes of hormones interact with their target tissues. And then the clearance aspect of this isn't going to require a ton of explanation as well. All right, and then just to bring this up, because I see this a lot. You should also know the difference between an endocrine and an exocrine gland, and this is a classic mistake I see a lot of people make. So we just talked about an endocrine glands. Exocrine glands are glands, a big problem that people make is that people just like to say, and I understand why it's easy to think this, because a lot of people like to think that exocrine glands move their secretions outside of the body, okay? And if you were to ask people, well, give me some examples of exocrine glands, people are going to say sweat glands, they're going to say sebaceous glands, they're going to say mammary glands, lacrimal glands, and so on. All exocrine glands, okay? Because remember, most of the, exocrine glands of the body are derivatives of epithelial tissue, from your skin. So during development, basically your skin created these inward folds of themselves, okay? And then these glands open right to the outer surface of the skin, all right? And then, most of these glands are just simple cuboidal, some are stratified cuboidal, okay? But in the end, they produce their secretions, like, I don't know, sweat or tears or whatever you want to think about, and then their secretions move through a tube or a duct over a very short distance onto another body surface. Okay. Now, the pancreas, for example, let's say we got your stomach here. All right, and then you've got your pancreas. All right. And then there's a duct that opens from your pancreas to the duodenum of the small intestine. All right, probably about 97, 98% of the overall job of the pancreas is to produce digestive enzymes. All right, and those digestive enzymes are secreted through a tube onto the inner surface of the small intestine, and which aid in the digestive process. Okay, these secretions are not meant to travel outside of the body. They're meant to travel from the pancreas, which is a gland, onto another body surface. Okay. So that's how I would like people to think about exocrine glands, as their secretions moving to other body surfaces, not just necessarily outside of the body. If you have pancreatic secretions coming out of you on a regular basis, go see the doctor. Okay, because that's not good. Okay, so understand these basic components or concepts of the endocrine system. Hormones and glands. These hormones travel, another big difference between, endocrine and exocrine glands is the distance of travel. Okay, exocrine gland secretions move through tubes over very short surfaces to their body surfaces, whereas hormones travel through the bloodstream over much longer distances in order to reach their target tissues. All right, so that's something to keep in mind as well. All right. So in a nutshell, that's how the endocrine system works, and you should know these very rudimentary differences between the endocrine and nervous system because they both are communicating, communicating type systems, but they both communicate differently, but yet they also need each other. All right. So, and next what I want to just talk about is something we've discussed before, but I want to bring it up again, regulation of hormone secretion via negative and positive feedback. Okay, negative and positive feedback. All right, remember, most hormone secretion is regulated through negative feedback. Okay, there are some though that there are some areas of hormone secretion that do operate through positive feedback loops, and we'll give an example of that in a second here. And you remember the basics of how negative feedback works, because you have to remember, when people like to first talk about feedback loops in these anatomy type classes or physiology type classes, they like to talk about them when bringing up a concept called homeostasis, which you all are familiar with by now. That's just a term to describe, basically physiologic balance, okay, or the concept of dynamic equilibrium. Okay, dynamic just meaning that we're our body's in an ever constantly changing state. Okay, and so basically, our if we want to maintain physiologic balance, that there are many aspects of our physiology that has these what we like to call set points. For example, let's just go with body temperature. Okay, I have never seen a textbook that never used a thermostat to describe this concept. Okay, because for example, you've got if you I don't know, it's the dead of winter time and you come home from the grocery store after work and you have more groceries than you can carry into your domicile in one trip. So basically so then you leave your door open while you run back out to the vehicle to grab some more the rest of the groceries, and then some of that cold air in. Let's say the room temperature you have on your thermostat you have set at 70 degrees. All right, your thermostat's going to pick this up, which would be the equivalent of a receptor. Okay, and then it's going to basically process this, and then it's going to trigger a response, and the response obviously is to turn on the furnace or the heater or whatever the heck you're using to heat your place. Okay, and then then this is gonna kick out heat, and then eventually when your temperature goes back up to 70 degrees, then this processing unit is going to shut off the furnace, and you're back at 70 degrees. The body is essentially no different. Okay, because our physiologic set points are constantly going up and down depending on the activity of the external and internal environment, so around and inside of our body. Okay. So, for example, heck, let's go with the thyroid hormone, ordeal. All right, your brain is what essentially regulates your thyroid hormone levels. Remember, thyroid hormone, as I previously mentioned, is used to increase your basal metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn calories, essentially. All right, and if your thyroid hormone levels start to go down, then your brain will release a hormone, okay, or if you eat a meal and you need to burn more calories, whatever the scenario where you need to get your thyroid hormone levels up, okay, your brain is going to communicate with the thyroid gland, okay, via a hormone called TSH. All right, and that's going to increase the size and the activity of the thyroid gland, and that in turn is going to upon the right scenario, as long as you have enough iodine in your system, that's going to stimulate the increase of thyroid hormone in the system. And then you're going to see an increase in body temperature. You're going to see an increase in your BMR. You're going to see an increase in heart rate, breath rate, all that other, all the other basic mechanisms that go with burning more calories. And then once your thyroid hormone levels get up to where you want them, where you need them to be, to return back to the whatever set point it is, whether it's getting your body temperature up, getting your, burning the calories that you just put in yourself, whatever it may be, then this physiologic response is shut off. Okay, is shut off when the thyroid hormone levels go back to normal. And that is a very critical, important concept that you need to focus on, because there are some endocrine disorders that revolve around this concept. Okay, if you are unable to shut off the secretion of a hormone, you're going to see, and that's the beauty of understanding, the endocrinology, understanding the pathologies that go with this are relatively simple. If you understand the basic function of a hormone, then all you have to do then is think in extremes. Okay, if thyroid hormone is a hormone that basically increases body temperature. Primarily, it's designed to increase your BMR, but some other effects are it increases your body temperature, heart rate, respiration rate, and so on. Just think about what happens if you're unable to stop the thyroid gland from, or your thyroid gland overproduces too much thyroid hormone for whatever reason it may be. There are a few different, and that's what you call hyperthyroidism. Okay, people are going to look very lean. All right, people are going to have what we call heat intolerance. They're not going to exactly like the summertime very much. All right, they're going to burn a lot of calories. So you get the picture here, and then vice versa with hypothyroidism. They're obviously going to gain excess weight. Okay, they're going to have lots of cold intolerance because, low metabolism means low heat output. People who have hyperthyroidism are also probably going to have higher blood pressure if they're not careful. All right, so you get the picture here. So essentially, growth hormone. I mean, we can sit here and list tons of examples of hormones. Insulin, okay, are all regulated through this negative feedback mechanism. And insulin's the good one to think about as well, because, think about it, with insulin, your blood sugar levels go up. You squirt out some insulin so you can, break down and store that sugar or use it for whatever purposes you need to, and then you stop secreting insulin. If you don't stop secreting insulin, your blood sugar levels are going to get so low, your brain's going to shut down. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Whereas with positive, so basically negative feedback is designed, this is a type of physiologic response, remember, so when we come in contact with the stimulus, this type of response is designed to negate a stimulus, not completely eradicate it, but just basically counteract the stimulus so we can return back to whatever it is our normal set point is supposed to be. Whereas that's the big difference here with positive feedback. Okay, positive feedback is a system designed to basically rid ourselves of the stimulus. All right, so let's think of childbirth. Okay, so basically, once the uterus starts to, once there starts to be, a lot of pressure applied to the uterus, and then the crowning starts to take place. The nerves from the uterus that go to the brain are essentially going to start generating more and more action potentials. Okay, more impulses, and then the brain's going to squirt out a hormone called oxytocin. All right, and what oxytocin is going to do is it's going to stimulate the smooth muscle, the myometrium of the uterus to contract. Okay, so then you can do the math on what's going to happen here. The uterus is going to contract, and remember, when you hear the word contract, you should automatically think shorten or get smaller. All right. So then this uterus is going to contract, it's going to get smaller, and that's going to push the child harder up against the cervix, and that's where when you look for the crowning and when it's time to give birth and so on. Okay, but as more pressure is applied to the cervix, you're going to have a higher rate of action potentials get sent to the brain, more oxytocin will be released, and the stronger the labor contractions are going to become. That's why they get stronger after you first start to feel them. All right, and then obviously you can probably think then what's going to stop this process once you basically give birth to the child, so we call parturition. Okay, once the child is gone, then that pressure from the cervix is relieved, and then the uterus and the cervix are going to slowly return back to their normal size. Oxytocin levels are essentially going to go down, or the secretion of them is essentially going to stop in general, and then that feedback loop, that mechanism will quit. Okay, so remember, so basically what's going to stop this process is the birth of the child. Same thing with the fever. Fever is positive feedback. Okay, you get an infection, your body temperature spikes, okay, and then you maintain that high body temperature until whatever is infecting you is completely eradicated. And then the fever goes down and goes away. All right. So keep that in mind, that most hormone secretion is regulated through negative feedback, but there are certain scenarios where positive feedback does occur. Excuse me, I'm drinking some water while I'm doing this. So, okay. So now when it comes to understanding, the hormones of the body, you have to break hormones down into two specific classes, into steroid hormones, which I'm going to talk more about in the next slide, and then essentially into peptide hormones. Remember, when you see peptide, you should just think protein. Okay, and the importance of understanding this is essentially, one, this is, the chemical class of these hormones affects how they circulate through the body and also how they interact with their target cells. Okay, these peptide or protein-based hormones, okay, remember, these are essentially polar, with the exception of thyroid hormone. Okay, but being that they're polar, remember, these things mix in water pretty well. So these travel through the blood quite easily. Whereas with steroid hormones, you have to remember, these are non-polar because steroid hormones are basically derivatives of cholesterol. Okay, and cholesterol, by now that cholesterol is a fat. Okay, cholesterol is a fat. Okay, and you know how well fats and water mixes. Okay, cholesterol is a non-polar molecule. Okay, water is polar. They don't, they don't chemically get along. So, and that affects again how these hormones circulate through the blood and how they interact with their target cells as well. Because you have to remember that what is the plasma membrane made out of? It's that phospholipid bilayer. Okay, phospholipid. Okay, it's a fat. And remember, we said kind of as a general rule of thumb, we said that polar, ions or polar molecules cannot just freely pass through the cell membrane. Okay, in order for them to do so, they have to interact with some kind of a gate or a receptor. All right. So that's basically what you have to think about with these peptide-based hormones. Okay, is these interact with receptors within the cell membrane. All right, and they cannot cross into the cell. Whereas steroid hormones, steroid hormones are able to cross the cell membrane, and then their receptors are found within the cell. And then they're going to elicit, a response through different mechanisms. Okay, so that's something to think about. And then, and now with steroid hormones, before I talk about this for a second, I was just going to mention too about these peptide hormones. They range in size. I mean, some peptide hormones may only be 11 amino acids in length, and some may be as large as over 200 amino acids. So so they can be small proteins and very large proteins, but that still doesn't change the basic chemistry of them. Okay, and the fact that they're non-polar and that they that they can circulate through the blood freely, but they interact with cells differently than steroid hormones. Okay, so keep that in mind. I forgot to mention that. Sorry. So with steroid hormones, okay. Sorry, I drew that double bond there poorly, but basically, as I mentioned before, steroid hormones, they're just cholesterol molecules that have been modified. Basically, they rearrange some functional groups of the cholesterol, and then you have a steroid hormone. So here, with the two, male and female, sex hormones, okay, you notice that testosterone and estradiol, i.e. estrogen, okay, both have the exact same, cholesterol skeleton or backbone. Okay, but their functional groups are different. All right, so when these hormones were synthesized, and obviously I put the differences in red on here, but that's all they are. But that doesn't change the fact that they're derived from a fat, and that they have to circulate through the blood differently, and they interact with their tissues differently. All right, I'm going to talk about those specific mechanisms in a second here. So that's just something to keep in mind, that steroid hormones are derivatives of cholesterol. Okay, all steroid hormones, you should think all steroid hormones are just rearranged cholesterol molecules. Okay, don't forget that little fact, and don't forget that they're, and you know by now that cholesterol is a fat. Okay, so I've already been mentioning this. When it comes to hormone transport, again, it's relatively simple to think about this. If we have, if we're talking the peptides, okay, this gland is going to squirt out the hormones into the tissue fluids. They're going to diffuse into the bloodstream. And then these hormones are just going to circulate freely through the bloodstream. And then they'll eventually diffuse out, and then they'll interact with the cells that have the appropriate receptors for them. Okay, they'll interact with the cells of the appropriate receptors. Whereas with, if we're talking steroids, okay, steroid hormones, a gland will squirt them out, and then when these diffuse into the bloodstream, okay, steroid hormones are going to have to be bound to a carrier protein. Okay, these are bound to a carrier protein. Also, thyroid hormone as well, because thyroid hormone is a nonpolar hormone. Okay, so even though thyroid hormone technically is not a steroid, it behaves like a steroid because of its chemistry. All right. So then, essentially, what's going to happen are these hormones are going to circulate through the blood. These steroid hormones are going to circulate bound to the carriers, and then eventually they will disassociate from the carrier proteins, and then they will interact with their target cells. But what they're going to do is they're going to cross the cell membrane, and then they're going to interact with receptors that are right on the nuclear envelope, or receptors that may be in the cystol of the cell. Okay. So keep that in mind, and how these circulate through the blood and the basics of how they interact. All right. Now, also, this also affects something that we call half-life. Okay, half-life and clearance. Okay, so essentially what half-life is the amount of time to basically degrade and get rid of these hormones, half of the amount of these hormones. Okay, a good example of half-life is, think of the expiration date on food, okay, the shelf life on food. So if I say that, so let's say there's 30 days in this month. All right, this is a relatively simple concept. There's 30, let's say, I don't know, I want to buy a gallon of milk, and I see that the milk was made on the 1st of the month, and that it expires on the 30th of the month. Well, obviously the half-life would be the 15th. Okay, so basically so as days go by from the 1st to the 15th, that this milk, like anything else organic, is going to start to break down. Okay, and then once we start getting beyond the 15th and closer to the 30th, that milk is going to start to, get more and more bad and more sour, and it's going to start to taste a lot worse. So that's essentially what half-life is, and that's why they put preservatives and all the other junk in food, because they want to extend the half-life, basically slow down the breakdown of, whatever the food items are on the shelf, so they can taste better, they can last longer, and that, in a sense, it's not, so you're not wasting as much money, but, at the same time, because you want to be able to sell the products. Okay. But unfortunately, a lot of those preserves aren't exactly good for our health either. That's why my motto in life is, if it doesn't rot, don't eat it. Now, so basically, so basically proteins, they're not proteins, hormones that are bound to carrier proteins and that interact within the cell have a longer half-life. Steroid hormones have a longer half-life. Okay, whereas these peptides, these protein-based hormones, these are cleared a lot more quickly. These have a much shorter half-life, and that's going to vary depending on the hormone we're talking about, obviously. But that's just a concept you need to keep in mind. Okay, is that these peptide hormones are cleared more quickly, whereas steroids are not. All right. And that's really all there is to know. This is a simple concept, because, like I said, if you're very well endowed with your basic chemistry, then this makes sense. If this knowledge has left you, bear in mind I have videos discussing the basic chemistry of these molecules in earlier videos that I've made. So so like I said, if this stuff isn't quite clicking, go back and watch those videos, or go back and review the early chapters of your book, because that's where they typically explain this material in anatomy and physiology books. Okay, now, in terms of how cells interact, or how cells interact with these various hormones, again, is also influenced by the chemistry of these hormones. Okay, the peptide hormones, i.e. the proteins, okay, remember, these are unable to cross the cell membrane, okay? So as a result, since these cannot cross the cell membrane, there has to be some other mechanism that is used in order to elicit the effects inside of the cell. And these peptide-based hormones use what are called secondary, I should write the whole word out, are going to use what are called secondary messenger systems. Secondary messenger systems. Okay, secondary messenger systems. So what we mean by this is a hormone is going to bind to a receptor, and then it's going to start to activate, I'm going to talk about the specifics of this in a second, activate a cascade of effects within and around the cell membrane, and in turn what that's going to do is you're going to generate these various chemicals or these switches that are going to basically either do one of two things. I mean, hormones essentially either increase or decrease some kind of activity within a cell. Okay, so basically what we do then is we turn, when the hormone and the receptor bind together, that's basically like I said, we activate these cascades of chemical reactions, and then the end result is we turn on these intracellular switches that are these secondary messengers. The hormone is the primary messenger, but the hormone cannot cross into the cell and directly stimulate some kind of response. So what it does is it activates these other molecules and messengers within the cell, and these act as secondary messengers. Okay, so that's what secondary messenger systems are. And there are two primary, the two commonly talked about, commonly talked about secondary messenger systems are the adenylyl cyclase mechanism and the phospholipase C mechanisms. Okay. So, and again, various hormones utilize these different mechanisms based on the chemistry of the hormones and the receptors that we're talking about, okay? Whereas, most of the pituitary hormones utilize this type of messenger system here, this adenylyl cyclase mechanism. So let's just talk about, kind of the nutshell as to how this works, all right? Which, again, is relatively simple. So what happens here is you have a receptor, and remember, a receptor is a membrane protein. Okay, so R for receptor. All right, and then you'd say we've got our hormone here. Okay, eventually this hormone. Remember, hormones are very specific, and their hormones or receptors are very specific to one another. Okay, based on the the chemical makeup of the hormone and the conformation, i.e., the shape of the receptor. And when the appropriate hormone binds with its appropriate receptor, okay, that's going to basically alter the chemistry. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a complex. You're going to create what's called the hormone receptor complex. Pretty straightforward. Hormone receptor complex. Okay, and remember, I mean, proteins are just coils of chains of amino acids. Okay, so basically, when you alter the chemistry, when these two come together, and you're altering the chemistry of this makeup, okay, this protein is you're going to see what's a conformational change. Conformational change. Remember, conformation is shape. So basically, once these two form a complex, the shape of this complex is going to change from, this receptor won't keep its original shape. Okay, and then you can see here that there are these proteins here that are called G proteins. Okay, that are basically associated with the receptor here. All right, and essentially, once this receptor starts to chemically twist and contort itself and undergo a conformational change, then what's going to happen with this specific system here is you're going to see this alpha subunit, that's supposed to be alpha, sorry, I drew that properly, is going to disassociate and go from being, basically, this is what we call, a GDP, oops, and basically once it disassociates, it's going to form GTP, all right? And then this GTP is going to migrate over to the enzyme, well, what do you know? Adenylyl cyclase. I'm going to abbreviate this AC, okay? And once this GTP, okay, binds with this adenylyl cyclase, this enzyme, basically that's going to activate it. Okay, that's going to activate that enzyme, because you know that most enzymes have to be activated by some kind of cofactor or coenzymes, or by some kind of switch. Okay, this is the switch that turns that enzyme on. But that enzyme cannot be turned on until the hormone binds to the receptor, and then we form this complex, and this complex twists and changes its shape, and then as a result, that allows this GTP to dissociate. All right, dissociate, bind with the phosphate, become GTP, and then this, in turn, is the key or the switch to activate this particular enzyme, adenylyl cyclase. Okay, and then essentially what adenylyl cyclase is going to do is it's going to take a molecule of ATP, all right, and it's going to essentially strip off. Okay, it's going to alter that. It's going to essentially alter this and form what's called cyclic AMP. Okay, so we're going to strip off some phosphate groups essentially. Okay, now this here is the secondary messenger. This is the secondary messenger, because then essentially what this is going to do is this is going to bind with what are called protein kinases. Okay, it's going to bind with protein kinases, and essentially, essentially what this is going to do, that's going to activate those protein kinases. And then those protein kinases, in turn, are going to essentially elicit the physiologic reactions. Okay, basically what you're going to see is you're going to see an increase in metabolic activity, or you're going to see a decrease in some kind of metabolic pathway. We'll increase the rate of, enzymatic reactions for some pathway. We will decrease the rate of chemical or enzymatic reactions for another particular pathway. Okay. And and so that's essentially how this works. And what you have to keep in mind is that as long as this hormone and this receptor are bound together and this complex is formed, this system will just keep going and going and going, because after this GTP binds with this adenylyl cyclase, okay, there are enzymes that will separate these two. We'll recycle the phosphate, and then another protein will dissociate, another one will dissociate, and we'll just continue to go through this cycle. But you have to remember, we're burning ATP throughout this cycle. Okay, we're expending phosphates, so we can recycle those phosphates, use that to recycle the GTP, GDP, the ATP, and so on. But that we don't have an unlimited supply of this material. Okay. So as long as these two are bound together and have this complex form, we're continuously going through this cycle, continuously. And if these two are bound for too long, that could, if you want to, generalize this, we could say this could burn out the cell, or this could lower the activity of the cell so much it's just not going to function. All right. So basically, once we elicit the appropriate response, it's very important that, remember, there are membrane enzymes that separate the hormone from the enzyme, and in the process, the enzymes may degrade the hormone down into smaller building blocks, and then that starts the breakdown and clearance of the hormone right there. All right, and then once we separate these two, once we separate this complex, then the hormone, then the hormone's receptor will go back to its original conformation or its original shape, and then basically it'll stop disassociating these G proteins, and then these mechanisms will shut off. The phosphate groups will be recycled back into ATP more. These you'll stop generating cyclic AMP, and then these protein kinases will become inactivated. So as long as we continuously generate this cyclic AMP and keep these protein kinases, these switch activated, the physiologic response will ensue. Okay, so it's important that that in order to shut this off, we have to separate the hormone receptor complex. Okay, so this is one form of a secondary messenger, and the other very common form of secondary messenger is called the phospholipase C mechanism. And this operates very similarly, but there are also some enough differences within this system. So again, the concept is still the same. Okay, you've got a peptide or a protein-based hormone. This hormone cannot cross the cell membrane, and we have to activate some kind of secondary messenger system. Difference is just the hormones are different. Okay, for example, epinephrine, okay, is an example of a hormone that utilizes this particular system. Okay, so let's say this hormone then binds to its receptor. The concept's is gonna remain true here. Okay, now you form this complex, the hormone receptor complex. This G, the alpha unit of this G protein disassociates, so we go from GDP to GTP. So now this is where the differences come in. Okay, this is where the differences come in. This GTP, okay, there's a different membrane protein here in this cell, and this is the phospholipase C, this enzyme. Okay, so this GTP is going to activate phospholipase C. Okay, and then what's going to happen, is essentially there are different chemical switches that are turned on. Okay, the particular switch in this situation, PIP2, sorry. Okay, we're going to be converting this molecule into our switch, and again, this all takes place within the cell membrane itself. Okay, and essentially what's going to happen are after this phospholipase C is done with PIP, you're going to be left with two separate secondary messengers, or two separate switches. One of them is going to be IP3, and the other one is something we call DAG. Okay, and basically here, and this is where the differences come in. One, we're obviously talking about different molecules, but what IP3 is going to do is it's going to work its way down to the SR, the smooth ER, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, or smooth endoplasmic reticulum, okay, where a lot of cells store calcium. Okay, smooth muscle is a good example of this. Okay, the SR is essentially a form of the SER. Okay. And then what's going to happen is once this IP3 interacts with the SR, smooth ER, that calcium is then released. Okay, and then the calcium is this calcium is the secondary messenger. Okay, the calcium then can bind to, because remember, minerals can act as switches to activate enzymes. Okay, calcium is going to interact with particular enzymes, and then the response will take place. And then DAG, this essentially, the previous mechanism we just talked about, this is where DAG comes in. It's going to act very similarly. It's going to act like cyclic AMP. This DAG, it's going to activate protein kinases, okay, which in turn elicits a physiologic response. Okay. So again, the secondary messenger here is calcium and also DAG. Okay. Which stands for, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. DAG stands for diacylglycerol, and the PIP is fatimidiolitsinol bisphosphonates. Okay, so think about this. There are certain medications called bisphosphonates. Okay, so then essentially, you've got these secondary messenger systems, and the same concept goes with the previous system we just talked about. As long as this complex is established, these secondary messenger systems will continue to go and go and go and go. But you don't have an unlimited supply of calcium to continue to stick to enzymes and keep them going. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. So again, there are enzymes that will degrade this. They'll degrade this complex. This hormone will either be broken down, again, just like the previous mechanism, either, will be broken down into, different units right away by the membrane enzymes, or will be degraded in the blood. All right. What else do I want to say about this? And for example, this is how epinephrine interacts with this receptor and basically stimulates a smooth muscle to contract. Smooth muscle have very different physiologic mechanisms in terms of contracting, okay, in terms of how they contract as compared to skeletal and cardiac muscle. Okay. So those are the secondary messenger systems. So remember that these peptide or protein-based hormones, they cannot cross into the cell membrane. So what they do is they activate these intracellular switches, which wind up stimulating the creation or secretion of secondary messengers, which basically activate the physiologic responses within the cell. So the primary messenger is on the periphery, and the secondary messenger is internally within the cell. Okay, so those are secondary messenger systems and peptide-based hormones. Now we have to talk about steroid hormones and how they interact with cells. And steroid hormones are relatively simple, because basically remember that steroid hormones are made out of cholesterol. All right, fat, and they are nonpolar. All right, so basically what the steroid hormones do is these directly cross the cell membrane. All right, but what they do is, and their receptors are found within the cystol of the cell or right on the nuclear envelope of the nucleus of the cell. All right, so then essentially what happens then is the receptor binds to, the receptor and the steroid hormone bind together, and then what you do then is, and then once you form this complex then interacts with, well, you guys all know what this is, DNA. Okay, DNA. All right, and basically it interacts with areas of DNA called SREs. Okay, areas of DNA that we call SREs, steroid responsive elements of the DNA. So essentially, what we form then, when we form this steroid hormone, when we form this hormone receptor complex, what we essentially form are transcription factors. Okay, transcription factors. All right. And, this is why it's important that you understand the basic concepts of transcription, because you should already start to think then that steroid hormones directly affect protein synthesis. Okay, these affect protein synthesis. So then basically what they'll do is they will basically they will get this they will get transcription going. Remember, transcription is a process that occurs within the nucleus. That's when we read a strand of DNA and we form a strand of messenger RNA. Okay, and then that messenger RNA is then going to travel out the nucleus, out into the cystol. It's going to bind with ribosomes, and then we will have translation take place. Okay, and then in turn, we will generate more proteins, and then these proteins will carry out whatever the physiologic agent or response is. Okay, for example, if we're talking testosterone, okay, testosterone is going to stimulate muscle cells, skeletal muscle cells, to create more contractile proteins, which in turn will make these muscle cells grow via hypertrophy. They'll get larger in size, and they will be bigger and stronger. Okay, if you're talking, a hormone like aldosterone. Okay, aldosterone is a hormone that we use to retain sodium in the kidneys. Okay, so this hormone will travel through the appropriate cells in the kidneys. It will, bind to the nuclear receptor, just like mentioned here, and it will interact with the DNA in the nucleus of that cell. And then what the cell is going to do, the cells that line the tubules of the kidneys, they're going to generate more, essentially, sodium and sodium pumps. So then what that's going to do is that's going to stimulate it, sodium potassium pumps, I should say. So then what that's going to do then, if we need to retain sodium, we're going to pump more sodium back into our bloodstream from the tubular fluid of the kidneys, and we'll essentially pump more potassium out in the urine. And again, which is good, we retain sodium when we need to in certain situations. But if we pump out too much potassium, that can be dangerous. You see this in diabetics. Okay, you see this in diabetics who don't take their insulin and they're undergoing something called DKA, but I'll talk about that much later on. Okay, not in this video obviously, but later on in other topics. Okay, so steroid hormones are relatively simple in how they work, and then eventually we'll, clear, and then, just like as mentioned in the previous two slides, once this complex is cleared, then the hormone is cleared, and then we break it down and get rid of it. Okay, so that's essentially how these hormones work. Okay, steroid hormones cross the cell membrane, interact with receptors on the nucleus, okay, and act as transcription factors. These have a direct effect on protein synthesis. Okay, and then, or they may, you may produce more enzymes to increase metabolic activity in the cell. It just depends on the hormone, and because you guys understand DNA, it depends on, what type of protein that this hormone, where this transcription factor is interacting on the strand of DNA with, and what hormone we're producing. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so so in a nutshell, that's how hormones circulate through the blood and interact with the cells, and which kind of leads me to the next topic, is something called up and down regulation. Basically, this is what we're saying here, is that cells can essentially increase or decrease their sensitivity to a hormone. Okay, and this is, again, is a relatively simple concept to understand. All right, so basically, if we're saying up regulation, all we're saying, so let's say this cell, we'll call this cell A, we'll call this cell B, all right? So let's say this cell A normally has 4 receptors for a hormone, okay? So what can happen then, what typically happens if we start to see low levels of a particular hormone, we can increase our sensitivity to that hormone then by, or various other physiologic situations by, remember, proteins can alter or cells can alter their protein makeup of their cell membrane. All they're going to do is they'll just increase the amount of receptors based on our physiologic needs. Okay. And then, because you have to remember, in order for a hormone to interact with a receptor, that hormone actually has to physically bang into or contact that receptor. So if we have a low level of the hormone in our system, and this is all hormones are important in their own right, but it's important that we really need to utilize this hormone. Okay, we can stimulate cells, to increase their amount of receptors. We increase the chances that this low amount of this hormone is going to bang into a receptor and then elicit some kind of response. Okay, it's kind of neat. Whereas with down regulation, you should just think the exact opposite. So basically, with down regulation, you decrease the number of receptors. Okay, and this typically happens when we don't need to be sensitive to hormones. Often cases if there are increased amounts of a particular hormone. Okay, so if we flood our system with too much of a hormone, then we don't need to have as many receptors for that hormone, just because if you already have high amounts of a hormone, the chances are pretty good that it's going to be banging into receptors, and then we'll be eliciting our responses. So that's essentially all up and down regulation is. It's just increasing or decreasing the amount of receptors within a cell membrane. Excuse me. All right, and like I said, more often than not, that typically has to do with the dosage or the amount of a hormone in our system. Okay, the lower the amount of hormone in our system, the higher the amount of receptors required, and vice versa. If there's a higher amount or too much. Okay, keep this concept in the back of your mind, because this is a concept I'm definitely going to be coming back to when we talk about certain endocrine diseases or pathologies. Okay. I've already talked about these. I don't know why I left that slide in there. Sorry. Okay, and the last topic I want to discuss is hormone clearance. Okay, and we've already kind of started to hint on this. So basically, we said that when a hormone and a receptor are bound together, okay, there are enzymes that have to that disassociate or attach these two, or detach this complex, because, as mentioned, if the hormone and the receptor are bound for too long, that could cause some problems. All right. So basically the hormone clearance process could start as soon as right here, just detaching the hormone from the receptor. So the enzyme may break down the hormone into smaller subunits, okay? And then those subunits will then, get into the bloodstream. All right, and then they may be further degraded by enzymes in the bloodstream. Okay, any hormone that's not, that's not completely, degraded, directly by the membrane enzymes will more than likely be degraded, okay, within the bloodstream, especially peptides. Okay, especially peptides. There are plenty of enzymes in the bloodstream that just naturally start to break these peptides down. Another reason why they're cleared a little more quickly. Okay, whereas with steroid hormones, okay, steroid hormones are often broken down in the liver. Okay, often broken down in the liver, and then are circulated to the kidneys, where you essentially urinate out whatever's left. Same thing with the peptide-based hormones. Okay, as we're breaking this hormone down into the bloodstream, it's going to just get filtered out by the kidneys, and then we're going to urinate what's left of that. That's why when it comes to testing for hormones in a person's system, urinalysis is often done, especially for steroid hormones. Okay, and then we know by now how well certain steroid hormones are cleared, at what rates they're cleared at, and that's why they make you pee in a certain cup. If you're an athlete, at specific times. If they suspect that you have a hormone in your system, that's why when these kind of immoral scientists come out with these drugs that are they're really hard to trace. It's one of the things they have to factor in is how well they're going to be cleared out, how long are they going to stay in the system, and so on. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is how the endocrine system works. Okay, if you understand all of these basic concepts that I discussed in this video, I guarantee you the system is going to make a lot more sense, because now all it comes down to is just knowing where the glands of the body are, knowing what hormones the glands are responsible for synthesizing and secreting, and then just understanding the basic functions of the hormones themselves. Will a certain hormone make muscles grow, or will a certain hormone make an ovum mature? Will a certain hormone increase your metabolic rate? Whatever, you get the picture. All right. Whatever it may be with the hormones. So keep that in mind. If you keep all of this basic material in the back of your mind while you're learning about the endocrine system, it's going to make it that much easier. Okay, and as usual, if you folks have any questions, always feel free to ask, and keep studying hard, and good luck in your studies. And I will. This is probably the only video I'll make today, because I need to finish making my presentation on the pituitary gland, and I also want to do the thyroid gland, if not this week, early next week. So take care, folks, and I shall see you in the next video.